has to be based on who those kids are. They're from 6 weeks old to 3 years, so it's mixed age, right? So you can't even do a lesson for kids between 6. I mean, you have kids who are crawling, not even crawling, right? Kids who are lying on their stomach doing tummy time. And then you got 3-year-olds who are like, you know, Spider-Man and all over the bookcases, right? And everything in between, right? You got talkers and kids who are pointing. You got a whole bunch of developmentals. Okay, well, what's the one activity for that group of kids? Well, there is no one activity, right? So what we have to do is figure out who are our kids and what do they need. So we got 3 teachers in every room for 8 kids. The ratios in our infant toddler rooms are 3 to 8. So that's so that when I'm holding that baby, right, and I'm helping this little guy figure out how to do a puzzle, somebody else is with 3 kids, and somebody else has 2 kids pushing the laundry basket down the hallway and getting the laundry done. Because that's how we roll if you've got a whole bunch of different human beings. Now add language. Half of the kids in our building are dual language learners. A whole bunch of our families aren't fluent in either language. Okay? So they're not in language-rich environments. Right? You got a whole bunch of kids who've gone through trauma. So how they show up may involve a whole bunch of behavioral interventions that are completely different than the other 7 kiddos, right? Because that's what they need. And then our pre-K is the same. We have more kids, 17 kids. That's 3 teachers in this room. So we have to be able to cut kids, split kids up into groups and things like that. We've got goals for where we want to get them, but every kid gets there on a different path, and they get there at different speed. So the answer to appropriate is super wide open, and it has to take into all these different domains.
And that kind of connects with the DAP statement when it talks about that individuality,
right,
taking into account each individual child. We always talk about, what's DAP is what's appropriate for that child, what's appropriate for their age, and then their culture or the context in which they live. And so it's like, this is what it looks like in action every single day. And I will say, this is a center where I really feel like DAP came to alive, for me, because when I worked at other organizations, we talked about it all the time. But Chris was very explicit about that, what's appropriate for that child and their family. And it was before, it would seem like it was always based on what's appropriate for the age group and not necessarily the child and their family.
Yeah. Well, so this brings up context. Remember I asked you that question about context? Yeah. I don't know if you had a chance to take a look at that. Did anyone want to give a rough definition of context? What that do you mean? I know, it's Bronco Burner 101, exactly. Yeah, and?
Well, I said microsystems.
No, let's just give examples of context.
Macro.
Yeah, okay.
You
You got an A. Good job. Okay, everybody else. All right, no, seriously. If I were to say, what is the context for your learning? Okay, yours, not these little kids, yours. What's included? Just start listening. Shut stuff out. Yep. What else?
Yep. The way that they learn.
The way that they learn. Yep. What else? Mm-hmm.
Where we're located.
Okay, geography, right? Community, where you're located. The environment, absolutely. An environment can mean a lot of things, right? I got a lot of couch surfing right now, right? So their environment changes every 6 weeks. I got a lot of Section 8 people getting kicked out of apartments right now. Right? We're dealing with just a major housing crisis across this country, right? So when you stop and think about, where do you live? If you're couch surfing and getting kicked from one Section 8 housing unit to another every 3 months, where you live is transition. What you live in is change. We assume people live in some place. And I'm here to tell you, I got a whole bunch of families who live in many places. And especially little kids. Their grandpa's on a Tuesday and their mom's on a Wednesday, and the dad picks up Thursday but doesn't drop off on Friday, so the girlfriend does. Right? Lots of villages are part of those environments, right? What else is part of context? Yep, what do you mean by that?
Like routines.
Yep, absolutely. Routines and the lack of them. COVID blew up. Didn't COVID blow up your routines? Right? Yeah, exactly. Right. So that happened with every family. And the closer a family was to that poverty line, the more that got blown up. Right? What else? Part of context. Finances is a huge part of context. The ability to navigate systems is right. Do any of you have family that work in like, TPS or DHS or some state or local agency? Does anyone? They're the one you call to say, hey, my license is expiring. What do I do? And they're like, go through these 17 things. I mean, like, they know how to work systems. And we have a whole bunch of people who do not know how. If they're getting booted out of an apartment, they don't know that there's legal aid that can keep them from being evicted. Right? They don't know that stuff. So that's part of context too. How much knowledge and competency you have in negotiating the systems. And by the way, the systems in this state, they suck. Right? This is the worst state in the country to grow up with your little kid. And I'm not supposed to say that out loud. That is just a true fact. And it's because there's a lot of things that aren't here. It's not about what is here. It's not about families. It's about what isn't here. Right? What else is part of context? For a kid in this building, what else is part of context?
Time management.
Sorry?
Time management.
What was the first word?
Time
Oh,
management.
time management. Yes. Oh, wow. Excellent. That's a great point, right? Your ability to get through. I mean, have any of you done the poverty simulation? Have you done this? That would be a great exercise. The poverty simulation is really awesome because it teaches you, it sounds crazy to say time management, and then you do this activity, which is called the poverty simulation. You get given an identity that's chosen beforehand, and you're like a little kid or an uncle or a parent or whatever. And all the services you have to access, the grocery stores, the bank, child protective services, the schools, all that is on the outside. And you just go through a week. And so it's okay, it's Monday, and then the world starts happening to you. And the most important thing in the world is time management. How do you sequence it? How do you get from point A to point B? I have a parent right now with 2 kids, one was with a severe medical disability, who was paying $14 a ride to get her kids here. Multiply it out, $25 a week, $30 a day, $150 a week, $600 a month to get her kids here. And she's trying to hire a nanny. Right? So you can say, well, I'll tap Uncle Joe for, a 10 spot. Uncle Joe's 10 spot is not going to take care of that problem, right? So financial management, right? Time management, organizing all this stuff you got to do in a day management, all that stuff is super important. There's one other factor here too, which is a really important part of what we've been talking about, which is the relationships you have with adults, right? So the teachers, their experience, their perspectives, their not just skills and not just knowledge, but their mindset. Their relationships with teachers. I'm saying all those teachers are part, all these teachers in this building, my faculty is the context, part of the context. But the kids here, parents, right? It's everything. We have a, you guys know about conscious discipline?
Yeah, Christy.
I was just about to say that.
Yeah, so can I do a conscious discipline ritual with you? I love you, you love me, we're okay, well, give it time. Here's my I love you ritual, right?
Yeah.
Okay, all right, so do I know I'm supposed to do an I love you ritual? Yup. Do I have the skills to do it? Yup. Do I have the mindset? No way, I don't love you, right? Get in my class, you little punk. I'm sick. I had to oh my goodness, right? What is that telling that kid? It's not conscious discipline, right? It's saying you don't belong. You can be successful here, right? And we get a lot of that here, right? We get a lot of teachers who have my way or the highway attitude, right? Right? We get a lot of folks who think compliance is what kids need to learn. And you can well imagine who that gets focused on. It is little black boys. All right? So it's really important to talk about context as bias. It's not fun, but really important to recognize. And we've all got biases, right? But if we're all operating without talking about those biases, then some kids get served and some people. So context is huge. And I'm here to tell you, in this version, it's way bigger than it ever has been before. If you were to go back and read the third edition of this statement, context just blew up. And there's a lot of researchers who are doing a lot of work on this. It's tricky because it involves a lot of stuff, right? But all the more reason to pay attention. The only questions that I had to do with those tensions, but I'm happy to let's shelve that. I mean, I think you can talk about whatever you want. So what would be useful to do at this point? Questions for me, thoughts, comments?
I've been wanting to ask you about like the minority for each of the places that we've been going to, but I didn't know if it was like gonna be me being biased or sounding biased or if it was gonna be appropriate. Like, I don't know if I know what I'm saying. I don't want it to come out wrong.
So I think I'll ask this question and then you can amen it and then add on. How do
And then I want to
you,
go back to that moment.
yeah. How do you support minority families, you know, especially like for us, and I know the answer to this question, but I'm going to say this. So especially like for us being at a HBCU, we're always, for me, it feels like we rarely get the benefit of like that strength-based observation. And it's like, oh, you know, when we read the research in the books and when I'm talking to the students about what's happening, it's always like at a deficit. And so, and I think the NACI DAP really hit on this a lot, but we're always looked at, in my opinion, from like a deficit model. And so now that, you know, these ladies are getting ready to go out into programs and they're looking for careers, like how do you support, you know, minority families, and what does that look like to really be equitable in the way that you teach, hire, so forth? So Dr. Young Jr., just add on to whatever.
That's basically what it was, like the support system. I guess because you don't want to take the attention away from the other students as well, but you also want to make sure that they're taken care of.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I guess my question is about the support system for you.
So I'll try to answer that question 3 ways, okay? And then I want to go back to your hesitation about asking me that question.
Mm-hmm.
So to start where you're junior, Dr. Young, is that what it's? So I can't believe I'm calling her senior, but over here. Let's start with research, right? Because the research is that you can make the case pretty clearly right now what you're supposed to do to answer this question. I mean, the work on family engagement is pretty extensive right now, and it's a lot of stuff that kind of would make sense. So we can talk in great depth about what that looks like, but I will say one of the foundational pieces, and it sounds silly, but the building ought to look like the families, right? So we need, if we've got a bunch of Latino families coming in, I need folks in this building who understand Spanish, who come from those countries, who understand the cultural dynamic, right? Yeah. My wife is Mexican American. We lived in Mexico. It's a big deal for me personally, but that doesn't matter, right? It's that we have a whole bunch of kids in this building who are going back home to families with, you know, people in Mexico and ditto African American, ditto Native, even though Native and Indigenous identity is pretty complicated here in this neck of the woods, right? We still need to be able to talk about it and be open about it. And my faculty needs to look like the kids. That is super important and it's very unusual. And it's one of the big differences between Health Educare and a lot of other systems. So TPS does not have a diverse faculty. We do. We've got a pretty darn diverse faculty at Health Educare. The second thing is to recognize that as the research shifts us away from this sort of dominant, hidden kind of dominant model around white middle class supremacy, one of the things we start seeing are exactly what Amisha was saying, which is what are the ways to think and look at strengths and start there. So one of the big things we know about African American kiddos is that their literacy and fluency is often verbal and it's often narrative. Okay, so if I'm not engaging kids in talk, and I'm not saying, hey, how was your day? And then when he wants to go on a 3-minute run about like the pancake, like, no, I am harming children, right? If I shut that child's access to that strength down, because I'm like, all right, okay, I got enough of you. Let's go.
Right.
You need to sit down and do X, right? So recognizing the ways that literacy and fluency are structured in communities and cultures and getting away from there's only one size is a really, really, really important way to work with families, right? Because families often come with teach them the letters, teach them the numbers, right? That's where they often start, and you can understand why. It makes sense, right? Because that's what they were told. But that means you often don't tap into a huge, rich vein of engagement with the families, but the families know how to do better than your teachers, right? Which is to say that the teachers can start incorporating those habits. The final thing is you gotta have relationships with every single family in the building. I mean, it doesn't matter where they came from or who they are or what. I mean, and that's a big deal for us. So one of the things we're noticing is that our English language monolingual people, and I unfortunately am one of those people, if this is one of our family members who speaks only Spanish and you're interpreting, instead of talking to her, I look at you. And we're noticing that these families are increasingly feeling marginalized. And if you ask them, hey, what can you do differently? They say, can you make eye contact? And it breaks my heart. That's a low bar, right? Please make eye contact with me. My child is here all day. Please make eye contact with me when you're talking. I mean, but yet you can understand why a teacher who's feeling awkward about language, I'm shifting over to you because you're going to reassure me because you're saying it. And then I'm going like, oh yeah, you say it. And all of a sudden she's feeling like a third wheel, creating problems, right? Here's two people who are awkward because I'm standing there. So actual genuine relationships and actually connecting to families and actually getting to know them. I mean, it sounds stupid and simple, but it is something that most people don't do. And early childhood can do it better than anyone else. As you know, when you turn 5, it's on the bus, right? It's dropping off at the door. You don't see teachers except at parent-teacher conferences, and that's if they show up.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I used to go to the Carter Booker parent-teacher conferences. It was about 60% attendance from the teachers. You know, and I'd see families that I knew from here and would be like, I guess I can't talk about that for 3 more months. I mean, those are good schools, right? But I mean, it's just to say, we have the opportunity for pickup and drop off every single day. We can touch a family twice a day. And we really think about that. So those would be my recommendations. There's other stuff too, like, provide culturally appropriate opportunities for families to interact. In our building, we got to be very sensitive to the fact that food things are take and go, right? It's like greet and go because parents can't stay here for an hour and 45 minutes. They can't hang around. They got to get to jobs or this, that, or the other thing. So, but there's a lot of other things. You move around. There's actually a chapter in the books. That answer your question? All right. So why did you find it? Why were you so awkward asking me a question about that? I want to hear about that. Yes, please be truthful. I'd like junior doctor, please be truthful this time.
What if are you here for teacher and I'm asking about minorities? It's just like, oh, well, that's the group that you're going to focus on. We don't want you because we need you to be open to everybody. That's one. Number 2, truthfully, people like to make it seem like it's not there, it's not real. They have the same opportunities as such and such and everything else. But it's like they fail to bring the light to it because you don't see it. So it's like you can't address something if you don't even see it either.
Right. So thank you for bringing that up and honestly answering that question. And I will say, Misha's a good person to talk about this with, and I would urge you to have that conversation too, maybe on the bus on the way back home. There are people who can't do it, but I just want to say right out loud, for whatever reason, there are folks walking on this earth who are not interested in making that conversation. There are also agencies in this world that are dedicated to doing that, and that means doing the hard work. And for reasons that are very mysterious to most of us, telling white people about their privilege is one of the things that's hard for white people to learn, which is pretty wacky when you stop to think about it. Like, if you're making me feel bad because I feel good, I mean, it's a very strange, right? White fragility is a very strange thing. So I think you want to actually go into environments and ask those questions. Because you will very quickly figure out, am I making somebody uncomfortable by being me? By asking the questions I need to ask about the people I want to serve, or are they going to start talking about, all lives matter? And all of a sudden, we've gone down the road to some other crazy world, right? And look, that exists. One of the things that we've had to do here, this is a big project last year, was we decided to honor the centennial of the Tulsa Race Massacre. And as you know, it happened at exactly the moment that the George Floyd murders happened. And all of a sudden, a bunch of white people were like, oh my goodness, bad things happen to black people, right? So that happened, right? Okay, well, that was actually an interesting moment in this agency because the leadership had to decide it was time to, my grandmother would say, just get off the pot, right? Either we were going to do this real or we weren't, because we had already had too many people in the buildings saying this matters to back off. So we did a major, I'll send the article around. We did a major thing about the Tulsa Race Massacre. See what we say. We trained 6 teachers to facilitate, so they had to learn about it. They had to learn about redlining. They had to learn about interstate cut and Greenwood Path. They had to learn about all that research because those questions were coming for people who are going to say that don't all lives matter. What do you mean North Tulsa is redlined? What do you mean that those outcomes are connected to systems, right? We had to be able to answer those questions. And then we had to decide who was going to participate and who wasn't. And the other thing that we had to do, I haven't talked to you about this is interesting, was I went to our head of HR, Lindsay, and I said, we're going to get a bunch of white people acting out. Because what's going to happen is they're going to start deciding that they need to say the things that they need to say, right? Somebody actually said a couple of weeks ago, we've had a president recently who said what everybody's thinking and had the bravery to say it. And the cold air rushed into the room, right? Because that was a dog whistle, right? That was a scary little moment of somebody saying, I want to tell you where I land on this. Well, that's not your problem if you work in this agency. You know whose problem that is? That's my problem. So I got to go to all my people and say, if this is happening, this afternoon, somebody, a new hire, African American, I said, somebody may say to you any of the following things. And the minute that happens, that becomes my problem. Because you know what? I want you to show up authentically. I want you to show up as you are. I need you to show up. Not you in quotes, not you in parentheses, not you in a jar, right? I need you to show up. And if somebody's giving you that problem, they're giving it to a whole bunch of other people in this building, and it is a violation of your federal rights. It is a civil rights violation. Yeah, air came out of the room. It is your right to function in any work environment without ever having to deal with any form of discrimination or prejudice. And that includes sentences that begin with, well, you people, right? The minute that starts, that is a violation of your federal rights. And that's why I had to go talk to the head of HR. Because I had to say, hey, I think we're going to have a whole bunch of people saying, yes, Chris, I would like to tell you, one of the examples, yeah, you got to get to Ross early because all the Mexicans buy everything by 10 o'clock on Saturdays.
Oh,
yeah. No, this was a consumer tip, right? The teacher who said that to this other person said it to say, oh, no, I just want to let you know, you need to, okay, well, guess what? Whose job is it to deal with that? It's me and the head of HR. It's not that person. And then we had to come up with a way to talk with those folks about, hey, here's the story. This is what you can do. This is what you can't do. Group of people into categories, not a good idea. Intent and impact, two different things. Just because it popped into your head doesn't mean you have to say it. Come say it to me, and I'll explain why what Grandpa said at Thanksgiving isn't okay to say here. Because it ain't Grandpa's Thanksgiving. It's a diverse work environment. And by the way, you don't want to work here? That's fine. There's the door. Because this is how we roll. We had some people leave. I will tell you the name in a little bit after having this conversation. But you know what most of the people did? They burst into tears because they actually love the people. But they do have grandpas in their head. And hey, you know what state you live in. You know what grandpa sounds like, right? So there are people working very hard to deal with this crap. Maybe you got some grandpas in your history, right? We have a family. We have a family that testified about how she was standing at Dollar General. Her 14-year-old, she wasn't fluent in English. Her 14-year-old was behind her. Her 14-year-old grabbed her as soon as she got the receipt, pulled her into the car and said, "Mom, we had to get out of there. The person behind was yelling, saying, go home." That kind of crap comes out of the mouths of every person, no matter what their skin color is, no matter how much money they make, right? So we've all got Uncle Joes and Grandpa Johns that, right, are living in our heads, and we need to know how to deal with that. And the three people who I had those conversations with were able to turn it around. They still have a hard time with it, though. They've been living this for their whole life. And there was one person who couldn't turn it around. And I handed her here's the form you fill out to resign for. Because she was violating the federal civil rights of the people who work here. So you need somebody who's got a bit of a spine and who can back it up. And in Tulsa Educare, I'm here to tell you, we got that spine. I don't know about other places, but we do.
Is there training that we go through that learn that stuff too? Like,
Sorry, say that again?
is there training that we go through that we'll learn that stuff too? Like the rights.
It's called something, but I can't think of it.
Look, you probably got an email about this from the EEOC office in Langston, and you said, oh, so go Google EEOC, go Google Federal Civil Rights Non-Discrimination. I mean, it's available, ladies. And you need to know your rights. You need to know your rights. So anyways, but the point is that there's a lot of organizations that did get a little woke. Look, maybe late, maybe not the way we wanted. Maybe they're not paying as much attention as they might to what's going on in Minnesota today, for example, right? Somebody got acquitted today for the same thing that happened before. Okay, so that's the way the world works, right? But there are organizations trying to shift, and this is one of them. Cindy Decker, do people know Cindy Decker, our executive director? She was on the Tulsa Public Schools Board when they changed all those names of the schools from Confederate names. And initially, she was one of the people who wanted to keep the D after Robert E. Lee. And she got the riot act read to her by Greenwood Cultural Organizations. And she changed her vote very publicly and said, I got to own this. I was on the wrong side. That's who I want running an organization.
Yeah.
Because there ain't no perfect people. And there really aren't any perfect white people, myself included. Right? So somebody who said I had to wake up and pay attention and get this, that's who's running this agency right now, for real. And it's not fun. It's ugly work sometimes, right? But you know what? It's the work that's done. So that's why I wanted to ask. Any other questions or comments or thoughts?
A question that I would have, kind of thinking about DAP, and first I want to make a statement and then I'm going to ask one question. So thinking about the work that you do and just like this very explicit example, I think that's evident of how you do developmentally appropriate practice. You live that stuff, and how do you get people to live it in the same, how do you teach it and then encourage them to live it, to see the importance and then to live it, I think would be the three ways, because it's not just, for us, I would say for us, let me say for me, because I know we're not monolithic, we're not all the same, but I would say for me, when I think about race relations, like that's always at the top of my list in terms of, okay, well, how are y'all treating Black people? How you treating Black boys? How you treating, because I have a Black son, what about the Black babies? You know what I mean? So that is always at the core of how I view things. Like that's what I'm thinking about. But there are other ways in other groups of people when we think about, same-sex families and, what that looks like. And so it encompasses all of that. So how do you create, it's a culture. How do you create a culture of developmentally appropriate practice in which people authentically believe in and live? That's a lot.
Yeah, no, thank you for taking like 10 times. Okay, so let's start with the serenity prayer, all right? Anyone know the serenity prayer? Go ahead. Look, Lord, grant me the courage to change the things I can, right? What else?
Yeah, but I know.
You gotta know the whole thing for it to work.
To accept the things that I can.
To have the courage to change the things I can, the ability to accept the things I can't change, and the wisdom to know the difference. All right. So let's go over this. We have spent a year and a half trying to figure out the answer to this question. And where we've landed is looking at the research, this is going to sound wacky at first, on addiction. The research on addiction is the best place to get an answer to the question of how do you change adult behavior in the hardest situation? Because addiction and bias are just two sides of the same coin, right? So what we've been doing, and I'm happy to, if you would want me to do this, I'm actually presenting at ELN, I'm hoping to present it anyways on this. We've been studying up on something called motivational interviewing. And motivational interviewing is a way of talking to other people to help them identify and encourage their motivation to change. Okay? You can't change people's behavior. You can't change people's mindset or skills or understanding unless they want you to do so. So this is a technique to activate people's motivation. So when somebody comes in and I say, so I heard you were giving advice about eating the Mexicans to Russ on Sundays before 10 o'clock, and they burst into tears, I'm thinking, all right, this is somebody who's motivated to change. She cannot believe I heard that, said it back to her and said, this is not who I think you want to be. So motivational interviewing teaches us about ambivalence. Part of changing adult behavior involves recognizing that if you already wanted to change it, you would have done so. So there's a little part of you that keeps eating those little Debbies or drinking that bourbon at the end of the night, right? Or getting on your phone or whatever, right? And you say to yourself, I'm going to change it, but there's other parts of you that have a hard time changing. And ways of engaging that is what we've been trying to learn how to do. In addition, it takes most adults 12 to 18 months to substantially change. Okay? So you got to be in it for the long haul. If any of you have boyfriends, husbands, girlfriends, whatever, sorry, right? Telling them what to do doesn't do it, right? And the most important way to change somebody's behavior is to change yours first. No, I'm telling you the research. I mean, wagging a finger at somebody and telling them that they're bad, it doesn't only not work, it ruptures the relationship. That you have to somebody else that's going to help them be a perfect human too. This is what I'm working on. What are you working on? That's connecting to somebody in the world that we live in instead of some fantasy land where you can point at somebody and they flip. Right? We're not houses. Right? It's not a half an hour show where you can say, stop doing that and stop doing it. There's a bunch of techniques connected to that. I could go on for a very long time. But the key is, if you really follow the serenity prayer and you want to deal with these issues, you got to know when to walk away for your own health. And this is especially important for Black women dealing with these issues. This is a white people problem. You need white people taking care of these problems. You need to be able to look at me and say, you need to go solve that problem, my friend. Because this is not the problem of African American sisters for the past 400 years. This is a white people problem. This is about white people humanity, right? They got to change. And so it's up to people like us to say, come on, let's go. It's time to work on this stuff, right? You can help me understand it, but it ain't your job to get white people to realize they're white. That is not, right? That's a little wacky, right? It's backwards, right? So that's, I mean, I've been doing social justice work for a very, very, very long time. And it's really important for folks in our situation to be able to say, this is our burden. You're the ones who need to tell us what we need to be working on. Right? And that's, so I can get into some spiritual stuff here, but like, no, I think that like people are not connecting to their humanity. I think that's the biggest problem, right? That if I'm thinking you're this and I'm a that, we're not connecting to something shared. But it doesn't mean you erase the differences, right? You erase them. So figuring out how to do that together is the goal. But sometimes I got to pull my white folks aside and say, listen, that S does not work around here, right? And it's not your job to say it. Right? One of the things that I have taught my the people I've had to have these conversations with is I always know what's coming. I say, and by the way, your best apology is changing your behavior, because you can never go talk with that person about this. You cannot burden them with this crap anymore. Change your behavior. You want to apologize? Change your behavior. So that's the work, is me and that person helping that person make that shift. Do you know who I'm talking about? I can't wait to tell you. There's 2 or 3 people here who are like, oh yeah.
I'm curious. I have some people in my head, but I don't want to make assumptions.
No. You shouldn't make assumptions. But it's interesting because you do have, look, you kind of pick up the vibe, right? Is this person aligned for the ride? If I bring this up, are they going to start talking about this, that, and the other thing because they don't want to talk about the real thing? Or are they going to take a deep breath, maybe lose a tear, and start doing the work? Because it's the work, right? It's not, I'm sorry I asked you to touch your hair, but can I touch it now, right? There's a lot of that that flows through our building, right? Other questions or stuff? I know you're getting ready to go.
I get such things, like if I'm wearing my
Yeah, you're not like, at the bunny, right? I mean,
I'm like, I
yeah,
know it's interesting, but.
it's beautiful and gorgeous, it's on your
That's
head.
not appropriate. To me, that's not appropriate.
No, it's not an appropriate question to
I love
ask.
touching your hair.
Yeah.
It's like, I'm not gonna ask.
Well, no, But again, I mean, everyone's talking about this because this is exactly the kind of crap that people are expected to put up with if they have hair like yours. And it is not appropriate. It is a violation of your federal civil rights for somebody to walk up to you and stick their hand in your brain.
No, stop rubbing my head. I'm not a dog.
Yep.
But I know my hair is short.
The only person who can rub my head is my wife.
What advice would you give to aspiring teachers and early childhood educators? So over your,
In general.
I know, I keep
In the
asking
next
these
2
loaded
minutes.
questions, yeah. But you know what I'm saying? Like as they go out, many, well, there's a couple that'll graduate in the fall. And then we have some that will, have like a year or 2 left. And so, I don't know, look, you've had several roles, you've been able to be involved in several organizations, and pathways. Like, what do you feel like maybe is the best piece of advice that you've received about your work in early childhood, or just what advice would you share with them?
I mean, I guess I would say 3 things. One is you are not going to get the money you deserve. That is just the fact. This country does not put its money where its mouth is when it comes to kids. And that's true for public education and it's true for childcare. You've all been in schools before, this is not, there are many, many, many countries that value teachers. You're going to get money, you're going to get benefits and so on and so forth that match the importance of the work. There's some countries where it's doctors, lawyers, and teachers not all the same level. This is not one of those. So you got to have another reason for doing it. And I'm a big believer in talking about those reasons. I have a very deep spiritual commitment to this work. And we've found ways to talk about that in this building. We had a child die in a house fire. When I was 6 months in, mom was lighting up, locked her kid in the room when the room broke down. It was the most horrible, terrible thing. It's on the news, etc. We had to talk about spiritual matters. We could not have gotten through that without talking about how to wake up every morning, right? And who was there patting us on the back saying, you can do this. Okay. So you gotta have a reason for doing this. Because it's not gonna be money. Right? Which, you know, my mom was a third grade teacher for 37 years, right? I mean, it's not a big ticket employment opportunity. So if that's something that makes sense, this is the most rewarding job in the world. Because every day I can look around and I can see kids, teachers, and adults learning and growing. Because my whole frame is development. Everything I'm thinking about is where are your strengths? How do I build them? Where are you being successful? How can I make you be more successful? You got a problem, let's flip it, turn it into an opportunity, right? You're mad at me. Oh, you trust me enough to tell me. I mean, there's always a flip side to this work. And if that gets you going, if that makes your light shine, then the most important thing, number 3, is make sure you find a place that wants to grow that light. Because if you go into a place, I gotta be very careful right now. So I'm teaching at OU, right? And I know about a program that some of my students are connected to where they're letting infants cry out. Okay? And the person I know that's connected to that leaves crying. Like, you cannot sustain your commitment to a career that doesn't have the values that you have. And this is one of the very, very few fields where the values are front and center. That's why we write huge books like this saying these are our values, right? It's not making money. It's not even, if you read through this, it's not even let's improve literacy scores, right? It's like, let's work with these kids and families and help them grow by recognizing all of the strengths they bring and help them to grow that. And if that makes you excited, this is the greatest thing in the world. But unfortunately, there aren't a lot of employers who will help you shine. And it might take a little while. That's what Nicole was saying, right? It took Nicole a little while, right, to find that place. Misha a little while. It's hard sometimes to find that place. But that's why you want to reach out to folks like us, right? Because we happen to know some of those places. We can help you out. And it's usually a killer. Every first year for teachers is killer. No matter what you teach, every first year is super hard. And then you get through that. And maybe you're like me, spent 25 years with me. So.
I was going to ask you also, Dr. Amirault, what was your educational career journey?
Oh, that's so interesting.
Like coming out of, let's say, high school, like some of our students here are freshmen.
Yeah.
Well, now you're at, went through your journey. Where did you start?
My bachelor's.
Senior year high school.
At senior year high school, I was going to go get an electrical engineering. And then I went to college and switched to computer science and English. So I got a dual degree in computer science and English bachelor's. Took a few years off. Oh, where did I go? Oh, I went teaching. I went to the education department. I went to the writing center. And then I went to graduate school and got a PhD in interdisciplinary cultural studies. One of my focuses was on human development and the history of it. And then I got a job running a professional development institute. I mean, I just kept going back to education because it fit the way I saw the world and thought about it. And so my degree wasn't actually that, it wasn't like this one or that one, but I always ended up in higher ed education departments, high school.
And how old were you?
It's exactly what I said. My 3-year-old went into this program and I thought, oh my goodness, I've been dealing with K-12 teachers who are worried about content. And now I'm talking with a bunch of educators who are talking about child development and their whole body and their identity and social and emotional development. These are my people. I found my church. That's what I thought. And that's the way it's been for decades.
Did you ever help your mom in the classroom and go through all of that and see what your mom did and say, hey?
A little bit. I also wrote my mom's master's. Story. I was helping her out. I was 12. She needed an A. Right? Yeah.
So, good experience, huh?
Oh, absolutely. Very complicated. Yeah. No, I mean, I was a school kid, right? Any kids? Any picture kids in here? Or school kids? Yeah. I mean, like, you learn about the way something operates from the inside, and you're like, oh, what they see in the pews is a little different from back here. Yeah. So it was like that for schools, right? I got to see what it was like for schools. So, yeah, that's, and it's human and broken and not perfect, but like glorious, right? Every single day I leave here with my heart. Even when it's hard, especially when it's hard, right? Because we were there for somebody who's going through something.
And my last question is, what was your full circle moment? Let's say I'm a student here, did you ever see that student a decade later, years later, who might, or showed up for you, or wrote you, or called you, or something? I remember you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have I used to be on the board in Rhode Island for the Infant Mental Health Association, and there was somebody my mentor and I worked with a family who had a kid with really, really, really severe behavioral stuff. And this was 15 years ago, before we really had good guidelines on trauma and brain development. And we kind of hammered out a solution and worked so closely with that family and so on and so forth. And I'm not friends with that family. He's graduated from high school. He's in the trades, doing great. He's making more money than me, actually. Turns out. And that family sends me like thank you note every 2 years. I mean,
$1,000.
no, they don't send me that much. No. But I mean, but honestly, like that is more. We had a little girl here who was seriously abused under the age of 6 months. Super dysregulated. There's an anecdote in an article that I wrote with Kauna and Diane that starts off with the story about her, where we were reading one of the Eric Carl books, and she started screaming and yelling at me because I made a mistake. And I said, "Oh, it's really hard when adults make a mistake." And she just fell into my lap and said, "Yeah, it's really hard." She doesn't even know what happened to her. It all happened when she was 69 months old, right? So she'll never have the language. But it's in her body. And that kid was here that kid was here for a really long time and left a fundamentally different kid. Because we change brains around here, right? I mean, you know this probably, right? But we actually do neurological development 101 every single day. And a connection with an adult who cares. What does Rothenbrenner say? Every kid means someone who's crazy about them, right? We got a bunch of people who are crazy about kids in this building. And that changes their brains. True quote. Look, as you can tell, I like the sound of my own voice. I will talk for as long as you will listen. But if you want to get back on the bus and head back, that's fine. And we can do this again or another time or talk about whatever you want. I'm just very honored that you came. I mean, we've been talking about trying to figure this out for a while, and COVID kept getting in the way. So thanks for coming. Keep asking those questions. You got to kind of. You got to find that slightly fierce voice where you're going to like take a deep breath and say what needs to be said. That's really, really important. And then you need to know when to walk away when it's not right. But there's a lot of us who want to have these conversations. And finding those pockets. In my spiritual tradition, we like to say, you can't do it alone and nobody can do it for you. Right? You can't do it alone, but nobody can do it for you. So you got to take a deep breath and have courage, and you got to find your people. All right.
Thank you so much. I know we didn't stay focused on DAP, but I have no doubt that everything that you said landed, and that was really timely for even just the conversations that we were having on the bus. And so, thank you.
Yeah, and I think that one of the things that can I give one more piece of advice?
Yeah.
It's really good to check out as you're reading stuff. Read it with that equity lens. Okay? Like I'm teaching, I got an infant toddler textbook right now. And we every once in a while have to talk about editorial issues.
Yeah.
Like checking the footnotes. And sometimes you look at a footnote, it's 1992.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh, okay, I see what's up, right? Not everyone is diligent about keeping up with this stuff. So if you read something and go, I'm not sure how that fits, that's a good thing to bring up with your instructors, right? It's a good thing to do a little. We got to be in a world where you check out whether things are true, because there's plenty floating around that isn't. And that's intentional. Right? Okay.
Thank you so
Yeah.
much.
And comments, are there any of you around here, anybody, like,